Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 177 of the podcast for June 10th, 2013. My guest today is Bob Emiliani, a returning guest many times over. We're going to be talking today about one of his latest ebooks titled Nobody is Exempt from Improvement, talking about the role of leadership, leaders at all levels participating in the improvement process. The subtitle of the book is How Improving Leadership Processes Improves Leaders' Credibility and Effectiveness. So Bob is, of course, a professor at Central Connecticut State University. He's a prolific author on lean management. You can learn more about Bob at bobemiliani.com. And for links to all of his books and different projects, you can go to the podcast page for this episode at leanblog.org/177. Well, I think he really needs no introduction to this audience, but our guest again is Bob Emiliani. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So you've written another book, Nobody is Exempt from Improvement. Can you tell us the story, behind this book? Why write it, and what the core messages are?
Sure. I've worked in 5 or 6 organizations over the years, and in every organization I've worked, the managers have supported improvement, but in every case they thought that they were exempt from improvement. In other words, they really didn't engage any kind of process improvement activities themselves. And so I've been a university teacher now for about 13 years, and I've had thousands of students, and I see the same thing from them. That for the most part, and there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, the managers are supportive of continuous improvement and so forth, but they don't see any kind of improvement coming from their own bosses. And so this is something that we all struggle with, is how to get the top leaders involved directly, hands-on, to do daily practice with lean. And we've been at this a long time, and overall haven't had too much success, though things are improving, but it's still a big challenge. So what I wanted to do was look at this problem in a more fundamental way, in a different way, but still through the lean lens. And so I asked the question, well, how well do leaders do their core job function? How do we know a good leader from a bad leader, and how can we make this less subjective and far more objective? So what I did was just reflect back on my own time in industry when I was a manager, when I was leading a business unit, and I said, well, what are the things that I did? And so I listed the things that I did, and then I grouped these into various categories. And it turns out that what seemed just various activities were actually processes that I was engaged in as a leader. And it turns out that there's 15 processes. These are the main ones, the main day-to-day types of processes that leaders are engaged in. And so leading and managing people, planning and budgeting, workload management, decision-making, problem recognition and response, problem solving, management reviews, employee feedback and coaching, team meetings, asking questions, listening and receiving feedback, information sharing, developing people, performance appraisal, walking around, go see, stakeholder engagement. And those are the 15. And so then, once I started to think about what I did in terms of processes, then it became very easy to figure out what are the quality problems associated with these processes, or in other words, the errors that occur. And so these errors that occur were, based upon my own experience, the kind of errors I made, but also the kinds of errors that I observed in the bosses that I reported to. So these were all real-life type of work experience errors that one observes firsthand. And then I enlisted the help of my students, and I asked them, okay, given these 15 leadership processes, what kind of errors do you see? And just list the main errors. Don't make it a stretch. Don't really think of anything that's idiosyncratic. Just what are the kinds of errors that occur in these processes? And it turns out that there's over 360 errors in these processes, and it's really stunning. You say, wow, that's a lot of errors. And that does not include, 100 more errors that could be made, that leaders could make with respect to the word choice, body language, facial expression, tone of voice, the inflection, and how they speak, nervous habits, inattentiveness due to multitasking or whatever. So there could be upwards of 500 significant fundamental errors that leaders can make in these 15 leadership processes, maybe up to 1,000 in total. And of course, Mark, think of it this way, what's the hallmark of professionalism? It's few errors, right? If you think in almost any discipline in music and sport and so forth, professionals make very few errors. But here we have professionals, managers at all levels, from supervisor to CEO, making these fundamental errors. And I just might add that, imagine leaders making these errors multiplied times the number of managers and leaders there are in a business. So it's really a huge number.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, from some of the processes you listed, some of these errors might include not managing a meeting well, let's say coming into a meeting without an agenda or a clear expected
Absolutely.
outcome, or playing with your BlackBerry during the entire meeting, or
exactly.
Multiply by all these different processes. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And so what I've attempted to do in this book is to say, you're not exempt from improvement. Look at your processes. There's all these different kinds of errors that are being made in what you do as a leader. And this has always been something that's been on my mind. When I visit a company, it's very typical. You visit the shop or office and you see these wonderful examples of lean and so forth. And that's great, but that doesn't do too much in terms of my interest. I'm always looking for, okay, managers and leaders, what are you doing to improve your own processes? And in most cases, the answer is nothing. So the requirement by leaders is to ask everybody below them to engage in improvement, but at their level, feel like, for various reasons that's listed in the book, they're exempt.
Right.
And they're not. So what I try to do is just somewhat starkly, point out, here's the errors. And there's a lot of them. And we cannot, claim to be professionals and doing a good job when we routinely make these errors. And again, I stress the fact that they're basic, errors. There's nothing fancy here.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think there's a huge difference between a leader supporting or sponsoring or championing, or whatever word you want to use, continuous improvement, and versus actually participating. My co-author for Healthcare Kaizen, Joe Schwartz, has stories about how at their health system, their senior leaders actually do small Kaizens related to their own work, and they publish them into their central database the way any other employee would. And they share them in meetings and share them in email and share them in all hands meetings. And, their general lesson that they promote to leaders at lower levels in the organization is that if you want employees doing Kaizen, you need to first do at least one yourself and share it with them and set that good example. And I think that's something we've been trying to spread as a practice, because I think we're probably in agreement that type of behavior is pretty rare.
Yeah, it is, and it's slowly improving. But I'm trying to give a little jolt to the system by identifying very specifically all of these errors that occur, and further put forward the notion that you have to be very aggressive. In other words, a daily practice, sort of a daily Kaizen for the elimination of errors. The next thing, though, that the book addresses is, okay, so all these errors are made. Well, what is the effect of all these errors on people?
Right.
What is the effect on employees in particular? And that's really the focus of this book, is employees. What is the effect on their mental and physical health? And what's the effect on the work that they do? And as you know, most organizations focus on physical well-being of employees, but not mental. So that's an important feature of this book. But from a physical perspective, there's many things that arise as a result of these errors that managers make, and the effect that it has upon people, including high blood pressure, acid reflux, headaches, feeling exhausted, heart palpitations, muscle and neck pains, and so on. But there's also this big mental piece, which of course ties into the physical, a stressful work environment, a feeling of helplessness, questioning oneself and one's abilities, lack of work satisfaction, confusion, depression. There's significant effect that these leadership errors have on people. And so the book points out that these aren't for free. There's a cost associated with these errors. And again, bringing us back to the notion of, professionals make few errors, not a lot of errors. And so if we made less of these errors, they'd have a better, more a favorable impact on employee physical and mental health.
And then I'm sure, there's also the connections then to the long-term performance of the organization, that this isn't just
Absolutely.
out of the goodness of our hearts, but because it's smart business, right?
Absolutely. And that's another question that is asked in the book. What's the effect of these errors on employees' work? And of course, usually the employees are overloaded with work. There's a political decision-making going on. There's daily firefighting. The employee ideas and opinions are ignored. People are socially uncomfortable with their coworkers. There's poor quality of work. There's reduced teamwork. There's higher turnover. Right. So if we eliminate the errors, we have positive effects on people from a physical and mental standpoint, and we also end up doing better work, and we enjoy the work that we're doing. The unfortunate part about all this is that employees are typically the ones who get blamed for the types of problems that occur that are work-related, and the leaders don't reflect on the errors that they're making that are generating these type of work-related problems, such as reduced teamwork or high turnover or poor quality work and so on.
Right. So, I think there's a common dysfunction of leaders not wanting to participate in improvement, but yet at the same time, I think we see kind of the flip side where a lot of leaders want to keep any improvement activity as their own. They're afraid to have employees be involved. Traditional suggestion boxes feed all the ideas up to managers, and the managers are either controlling or they're the bottleneck in the process. Why do we see that so frequently?
Well, I think basically it is a matter of control. When I was first involved with Kaizen, the managers understood that there was waste, unevenness, and unreasonableness throughout the company. We were focused principally in operations, but they understood that was the case. And so when we did Kaizens, we did rapid changes to improve flow. And we didn't study a problem area and then present it to management to get their permission to proceed based upon some return on investment or internal rate of return figure. So the way a Kaizen has evolved in many organizations is a stage gate process where you've got to get approvals along the way, and that's just all wrong. Right. The managers basically have taken Kaizen and made it fit to their methods and sense of control that they feel that they need to have.
Right.
So it's a very unfortunate thing. The corollary to that is, of course, people complain about, well, this Kaizen stuff doesn't work, it goes so slow and so forth. And part of it is this control mechanism that's been placed on Kaizen, as well as the atomization of Kaizen. People today do a 5S Kaizen, and back in the day, 5S was one of 15 or 20 things that we did, not the one thing we did. So, but let me also get back to the book here a little bit, because one of the, you can't just point out all these problems and their effect upon people. You have to have a way to, improve leadership processes and eliminate these errors. And so Kaizen is the basic methodology outlined in the book, but it specifically focuses on standard worksheets and standard work combination sheets and visual controls, creating those to create processes that are designed to eliminate many of these errors.
Right.
And so I present the formulation for standard work and standard work combination sheets for leadership processes. So they look similar to the types of sheets that we used back in the day and that are still used today by some people for standard work and standard work combination sheet. But they're adjusted to reflect leadership processes.
Sure. One other And I think that's also, from my experience, a fairly rare practice when you see standard work for leaders actually being used. It's happening more in healthcare,
Yep.
but it's still by no means the norm. One other question I want to ask, when you talk about these errors in management processes, what do you think are some of the root causes? I mean, rather than just blaming, and I know you're not doing this, but some people might blame the individuals for the errors that they make. Have you thought about or written about some of what some of the underlying root causes might be, so that we can address this?
Yeah, I think there's just a lack of awareness that these errors are occurring and the significance of these errors and so forth. So a lot of, I mean, it's just kind of like back when I was first learning Kaizen, all these mounds of inventory at each workstation looked normal. We didn't know that was a problem until somebody told us it was. And so basically what this book is saying is, here's your mountain of errors, associated with each leadership process. This is a problem, and we need to correct this. So you're right. It isn't a blame the leader thing. It's a blame the process. And in many cases, these leadership processes, people don't even recognize them as processes, just kind of daily firefighting activities, but they are in fact processes.
Right.
And then we need to understand it that way, and that allows us for a basis for improvement. Should also add, though, that there's an interesting thing in the book that shows the relationship between the 15 leadership processes. Lean leader competencies in comparison, all of that in comparison to traditional leadership competencies. And so it's an interesting spreadsheet that compares these things. Also, an interesting thing, too, on the way for producing this book, the people who reviewed the drafts of, copies of the book thought that I should provide examples, worked out examples of standard work combination sheets, and the visual controls. And I purposefully did not do that, and I want to explain why. And I think this is a really, really important point. Throughout the book, I emphasize the need for the leadership team to get to know their continuous improvement people, their Kaizen office, those people, the Office of Continuous Improvement, whatever you call it. Get to know those people and utilize them as a resource to help improve your leadership processes. I want them to view the Kaizen facilitators as valuable resources for the long term versus how Kaizen promotion office people are typically viewed as people to fix things in the short term and often get laid off.
Right.
And I'm really trying to push a relationship to occur between, somebody deep down in the organization, but who's a great Kaizen facilitator and can help, not do for you, but help you construct your standard work and standard work combination sheets and so on, and understand that these people, like everybody else in the company, but they have a lot of valuable knowledge, and to forge a relationship between the senior management team and the continuous improvement people.
Yeah.
I mean, there really needs to be a relationship there that is different than what we currently have.
Well, and I think if you had published, too many kind of pre-filled in examples, there's a temptation then for people wanted just to copy instead of developing their own, right?
Well, yeah, and part of learning lean management means learning to think for yourself. And so, yes, you have to go through that's another thing I caution the readers is, you don't hand this off to your Kaizen people to have them do it for you. They're going to facilitate, and you need to get to know them, and they'll help you, but you have to do this stuff yourself. You have to learn by doing.
Yeah. And that, I think, sometimes is uncomfortable. I see this a lot in healthcare. People are uncomfortable trying something that they think they're not going to do perfectly. And sometimes that leads to just being paralyzed and not taking action at all. We're afraid we're going to look like we're less than expert. There's such an expert culture in that industry. It seems like that's one thing that's a challenge of trying to get people to understand try it, how bad could it be, and learn and get better over time. That can be fundamentally uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people.
I agree it is, and I think people have the deeply embedded viewpoint of we got to figure out the one best way of doing it, and then do it that way, and then move on to other things.
Or better yet, tell me the one best way. I don't want to figure out the one best way. Tell me. Yeah.
Right. But we need to think about this more like, mowing the lawn. The grass grows, and so we got to cut it, every week, right? I mean, it's ongoing. It's not, and I'm speaking from my reference having lived in Florida for a number of years, not up north where the snow covers the grass, but year-round lawn mowing. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Maybe one last question here before we wrap up. I'm curious to get your thoughts. I hear from a lot of organizations, especially I'm mainly talking the healthcare organizations, about Kaizen, and people say, well, yeah, this makes sense. I wish we could do this, but our culture's not ready yet, which seems like kind of a particularly self-defeating attitude. We can't do Kaizen because we're not ready for Kaizen. And like people, I think, have kind of twisted themselves in knots as opposed to just trying it and working toward that culture of continuous improvement. I mean, is there, how, in your experience, how do you try to get past that kind of self-defeating talk, or that we're not ready?
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult thing to do because obviously the leaders are in charge, and you can show them something that makes the most sense in the world, and God Almighty will say, yes, this is true, but the leader can choose not to do it, so there's always that problem. But one of the ways I approach it is to say that, well, I guess you're satisfied with all these errors and quality problems, and you're satisfied with letting people struggle. You're not setting them up to succeed, but instead you're satisfied to let them struggle. You're satisfied to create a complex, chaotic, high-stress environment. You're basically satisfied with the status quo, and that's no way to live. This is one aspect of lean that I have just never understood, that people should be racing towards it because it creates a better quality of work life in the workplace. It's a healthier work environment. It's a more fun place to work. It's more interesting. Ideas matter. But to most people, that's seems like a vision too far. When in my world, it was an absolute reality that I experienced directly, and it's not that far away. But you just obviously have to be committed to want to go do this. So some of this revolves around just kind of imagination and creativity, a lack of ability to imagine a better workplace, a better work life, one where you don't have all the blame and so forth. Fundamentally, it connects to the respect for people principle.
Right.
We're satisfied with an organization that disrespects people, and in particular our employees, but of course our employees are doing things on behalf of our customers and our investors and so on. So it affects all stakeholders.
Well, I think those are really important lessons, and I'm glad you highlight those not only in this book, but one of your recent books, Lean is Healthcare. And for the listeners, I'll point out, if you go to Bob's website and if you find Bob's Amazon page, and I'll have links to this in the show notes for the episode, you can buy Bob's book. And I'm noticing, as I'm looking at here, as an Amazon Prime member, there's a number of these books that you can actually basically rent and borrow for free. I don't know, Bob, I don't know how you or other authors make money off of that. There's other books you can I think if you want to keep it forever, you can buy it, and
they're inexpensive. So, yeah. They're very topically very focused, and they are short reads. It's not like my print books, which the shortest one is 200 pages. These are short reads.
Yeah, and they're good reads. It's like Bob's talking to you, so I definitely recommend the books. I hope you'll check it out. And Bob, thanks for being a guest once again on the podcast today.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.